Hello and welcome to Hamer Reviews. My name is Christopher Hamer and today we're going to be taking a look at the Nikon 70-200 2.8S lens for the Z mount series cameras. Now I've actually already published my pre-review of this lens. You can find a link to that at the top at the moment. And this review is going to go into a bit more detail. I've now had it for over 2 months and I feel a bit more confident about being able to tell you what I actually think about it and what it's like to use on a regular basis. So to start off, I just want to talk about what I've been using this lens with and the accessories that it comes with. So I've pretty much been using this just on the Nikon Z50 and Z6. Those are the two Z mount bodies I have. So I've been using it on both. Obviously, with the Z50 being a crop sensor camera, you actually multiply the focal length by 1.5, so it's been great to get that little bit closer. And I've also been using this lens with the TC 1.4Z by Nikon as well, and you can find a link to that above where I reviewed that piece of equipment. So let's just start off with the included accessories and design. So you actually get the HB92 lens hood, which I think is really interesting because it has a sort of felt lining on it, which isn't something I'm used to on Nikon lens hoods. It's an interesting choice and perhaps there's a reason for it. I'm guessing to reduce the reflections inside the lens hood, but it's not something I've seen before. It's also a lot less deep than the lens hood from my 70-200 2.8 VR1, which I've owned since 2008. So quite interesting that. It's well made and has a nice catch on it, so it stays on the lens and can be mounted both ways. Works fantastically well, haven't had any issues with it. You get your obligatory lens cap, so this is a 77mm lens cap. You also receive the rear cap and you receive the most useless case for the lens I've ever seen. It's basically just a piece of microfiber that has been sewn together. I've left it in the box. I'm not going to be using it. It provides no protection for the lens and quite frankly, I don't think you should bother either. If you want an alternative, I use the Domke lens sort of bags which you can just Velcro over these and they provide a lot more protection and that's probably what I'd use instead. So onto the design. This is a very unassuming lens for Nikon in my opinion. So for £2,500, which is what this lens costs, you basically get an all black lens with the white lettering and then you get that sort of silver ring here at the back. An interesting choice. I actually quite like it. I think it's quite nice. It's unassuming and it sort of shouts a little less than some of the gold ringed lenses, but it does take some getting used to. You have 3 rings that you can control the lens with on this 70-200. So you have a front zoom ring, which goes from 70-200. You have your focus ring. Now it's worth noting this lens is fly-by-wire, so when you move this ring, none of the lens actually moves internally. And then at the back of the lens, you have a control ring. Now the control ring can be set to different functions such as ISO, exposure compensation, the aperture of the actual setting that you want. It's actually quite cool to have, but I'm going to talk a little later about why I'm not using it very much. In addition, you obviously have the OLED display, which we've become accustomed to on Nikon's high-end S lenses. So the 24-70 has it, the upcoming 14-24 has it, and the 58mm 0.95 Noct has it as well. And I believe the 1.2 aperture lenses such as the 50 1.2S have it as well. It's an interesting thing and we're going to be talking about that too. I don't want to cover it right now. You also get 5 function buttons. 1 on the right of the lens, 1 on the top, 1 on the bottom, and 2 to the left. On the left, you have a function and function 2 buttons, so 2 separate settings, whereas these are all the same. In terms of how I have my lens set up, so in this case, I have function 2 set to the magnify function, so I can magnify into the subject I'm taking photographs of to ensure it's perfectly in focus, so I can use that manual focus override. And these I all have to lock the focus position in place. So the AF lock and the exposure lock. In terms of using this lens, Ergonomics, I actually quite like it. Now, the original 70-200 2.8 VR1 that I used to use had the zoom ring and focus ring in opposite parts of the lens. So the zoom ring was actually over this part and the focus at the front. I actually have come to prefer it at the front now. It's taken me some time to get used to it, but it just provides a better balance, especially on the smaller cameras such as the Z50. The Z6 I use with the NBN10 battery grip, so it's a bit chunkier, but actually it provides better balance because you can sort of have your hand underneath on the tripod foot, which just provides a little bit of better balance. And it's actually a really nice short throw, and it's quite light, so I can actually move it from 70-200 just with my thumb without having to move my hand very much, which is fantastic when you're out there taking photos and want to quickly change your zoom. The focus ring I'm absolutely fine with. The fly-by-wire element takes some getting used to because it sort of accelerates based on how quickly you move the ring, so you don't have sort of a linear change, and that's just something that you have to get used to, unfortunately, with this. I found it hard to get used to on all of my Z mount lenses, and it's something you're going to come across with all those, but I think it's just one of those things. Obviously, you do have the tripod foot as well. The ring is fixed, which I think is fine, and the foot is removable. I have to say the actual nut on this is plastic, which I think is a bit poor for £2,500 lens, which is what this costs. But I guess that's just a decision Nikon made. I know some of you wanted an Arca Swiss tripod foot on here. This isn't, but I'm sure someone's going to sell one soon. And I'm not sure that my original VR1 had this, but I quite like having the actual tripod mount on the bottom of the lens as well, so it gives you a little bit more flexibility. So just put that back in place. In terms of other controls, you have an autofocus and manual focus switch on the side, and then you have a focus limiter switch. So you can fix this to 5 meters or more, or obviously the full focus range. There are no VR switches on this. I don't know why. It's a silly omission, and Nikon should have put them on there. It's on par with not putting controls on the NBN10 battery grip, which has annoyed people. I think this is a silly omission. It wouldn't have taken much to put an extra switch there, and forcing you to go through the menu system I think is very silly, because personally I don't like having it in my information menu, and yeah, it's just not quite how I'd want it to be set up. But again, that's a choice Nikon's made. But from a design and ergonomics perspective, overall, using it on a day-to-day basis, my concerns are fairly minor. It's never got in the way of me getting a shot, and not being able to switch the optical image stabilization on or off isn't actually an issue for me, because 99% of the time I use it on, and that 1% time when I'm, say, shooting on a tripod where I'd want it off, it's quite rare, and having to go through the menu is fine. It's just an annoyance. The zoom ring at the front I really like. It's easy to use. The focus by wire is something you're going to get used to. And then you have that OLED screen on the top. Now, I've put out a short video on how to adjust it, because in my pre-review I said that the one time I wanted to use it in the daylight, I couldn't read it. Now, it turns out you can make it a bit brighter, but quite frankly, when it is bright outside, it is very hard to see. If you're in direct sunlight and you're just glancing at the top of the camera, so you're actually holding it and you're just glancing at the top of it, so you're taking your eye off to have a look, it's actually quite hard to see in bright sunlight. It's a bit gimmicky, but where I found it useful is when adding teleconverters to this lens. So what I really like is that if you add the teleconverter, it knows the new focal length. So rather than showing you, say, 70 millimeters, it'll show you 98 if you've got the 1.4 times teleconverter on it. That's quite cool. I actually really like it. I also wonder whether Nikon could have changed the settings so that if you connect it to a DX camera, it shows you the effective focal length rather than the actual focal length, because they can clearly do that with the teleconverter. So why not, if you add a, well, let's say this Z50 to it, that it would show you that you're actually at 300 millimeters rather than 200 when you're fully zoomed in. Interesting, something to consider. I actually don't think it's terribly useful. I mean, I'm just flicking through it now, but being able to see the f-stop, I mean, if I have my eye up against the camera, it's there in front of me already. Okay. Being able to see a focus distance has actually been useful from time to time, just sort of to quickly focus in on a subject, and I can gauge roughly where it is and focusing across. Fine on a tripod, kind of works. Useful in astrophotography to work out where infinity is, so that you're at infinity and can then fine tune from there. But it's just a bit gimmicky, and it's an OLED screen, and I think we're paying a premium for it. And so far, I haven't really been that into it. What I would like to see is Nikon give us a few more options with what we can do with that screen with the rear, with the menu system, basically. I'm not sure what you'd want them to do at this point, but I just think if you have a few more options, maybe there's a way you can use that screen more effectively than you do at the moment. Because especially if you're using this as a Z50, it's the only screen on the top of the camera that you have. So that's where it is slightly more useful, because if you want to check your aperture without looking through the lens, so if you're specifically on a tripod, it's kind of useful to have that. But again, something to think about. Lastly, we have the control ring. Now, I really like the control ring on all of Canon's RF lenses. So I used to have the Canon EOS RP, had a couple other RF lenses, and I really like their implementation of the control ring. Mostly their control rings have been at the very front of the lens, and I much prefer this than having this at the rear. My reason is as follows. We went to a wildlife park to see some big cats, and it was actually one of the first times I was using this lens, and I thought, well, one of the things that we're going to be experiencing today is it's going to be getting darker and darker, and I was using it with the Z50 and on the Z6. And on the Z50, you have the dedicated ISO switch as you do the Z6, but it's just kind of, I don't know, it's a bit more awkward for my finger to go over to the ISO switch. I kind of have to crick it backwards a bit more than I like. So I thought, why not have the ISO setting on the control ring? So I set that up, and what I ended up doing is completely without noticing, and I'm not sure how I did it, but carrying the camera from place to place, changing that ISO setting. So I think that having it at the rear of the camera just makes it more likely for you to change those settings by accident without wanting to. To me, that's a bit of an issue, because if I'm changing settings without thinking about them and without noticing, I might end up taking photos at, say, ISO 1600 that I didn't want to take at ISO 1600, and that's exactly what happens. So I'm a bit conflicted. I've actually turned it off and I'm not using it, but I do see the value of having it. So if you're working on a tripod, I think cool, set up the control ring. If you're not, be very careful that you don't change those settings by accident, because I have been doing that a lot, which led me to turn it off. Now, let's talk about autofocus performance. I don't have a recorder that allows me to record what I'm seeing inside the viewfinder, but I've got some examples of focusing from completely out of focus to focus, so from far away to close, etc., to give you an idea that you're seeing now. I'm actually very happy with the focus speed of this lens. I haven't seen a huge amount of difference, or any difference really, between the Z50 and Z6, which is good. So you get that nice quick speed, regardless of which camera you're using. It works very well with both the autofocus system on the Z50 and on the Z6. Super fast, really good, what you'd expect. And it is quicker, undoubtedly, than my 70-200 2.8 VR1 version. So that's been really cool, and I'm really pleased to see that Nikon's upped their game when it comes to autofocus. Tracking objects equally hasn't been an issue in autofocus continuous. And yeah, I don't have any issues with the autofocus. I don't think they could have made it much better than it is, so that's absolutely fine. In terms of optics, I think it's interesting how sharp this lens is. So when I was sort of building out my ideal Z mount kit in my head before I got the Z6 and before I got the Z50, I kind of knew I'd get the 50mm, I knew I'd get the 70-200. I thought I might get the 85mm prime. I've obviously got a 24-70 kit lens, which has been fantastic, and also the 14-30 f4 as well. I'm no longer buying the 85mm 1.8S lens. because this at 85mm at 2.8 is absolutely incredible. It is so sharp and the colours are so vivid and so nice that I just don't see the benefit for me personally of having that lens. I occasionally shoot portraits, but not that often. And for me, this 70 to 200mm lens is perfect. It does everything that I want it to do. And as you can see from those portraits I've put up, I think you'll agree, they look really good. Another thing that I'm really impressed by is that this lens can handle ghosting fantastically well. So you don't get those sunspots on the inside of the lens when you're shooting into the sun very much. They look really nice when you do get them. They're very small. And I think that's something that Nikon's really worked on. I think the coatings throughout this lens are just incredible because, as I said, it's leading to that fantastic sharpness. It's leading to really nice colors. The definition is just amazing. The lens wide open at 2.8 to me seems just as sharp as it is at f5.6, f8. It's just an incredibly sharp lens, and even if you drive it to the absolute max, and you know you've bumped that aperture all the way up, it's still really nice. So in those situations where you need that sharpness all the way through a photograph, you can use this stopped down completely, or indeed wide open without any major issues. There are obviously going to be situations where this lens is a little too long for some people, and I think that's something that is worth shortly discussing. Despite Nikon taking the view of, you know, we're going to be able to make more compact lenses, etc., they've generally been bigger. And if you compare this to the 70-200 2.8, the current E variant for the F mount, this seems to be about the same length, if not slightly longer. So it's almost like they've added the F to Z at the bottom, which they don't seem to have done because I think they've rebuilt it. But it's just something to be aware of. It is quite a long lens, so it's probably good it's all black, because otherwise it'd be quite obvious, especially connected when to something like the Z50. So yeah, essentially, I think this lens is fantastic. It is very expensive. There's just no getting around that. Professional 70-200 lenses always are, and I think it's interesting to compare this to, say, something like Canon's 70-200 2.8 RF, where they've taken a completely different approach and done something different, i.e. made it a collapsible lens. Some of you will like that, some of you won't. I think the majority of people dislike the fact it's going to suck in more dust, probably. But I think it's the case that Nikon's playing it safer with their current lenses. But optically, I honestly haven't seen anything better than this. It's just been magnificent to use, and it's just as good to use with the 1.4x teleconverter. I'm still waiting for the 2x teleconverter. Eventually I'll get that, and it'd be really interesting to see if this lens holds up when we're using that. So make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss that when I eventually get my hands on one. Overall then, very pleased with this lens. I think it is worth the money. I actually am warming to the design more than I thought I would. I like the fact that you have a lot of options for controlling it, though why isn't there a VR switch? Overall, I'd recommend it. Obviously, it's a lot of money. Work out if you need that or not. I've seen some amazing results from the 24-200 lens that Nikon also sells at Z mount. So if you don't need that fast 2.8 aperture and you're happy if I think it's 6.3, and you don't necessarily want something quite as big, I would consider that. I'm hoping to get my hands on one in the next few months so I can have a go and review that as well. But overall, this is a good choice if you're on the Z mount. I think it's a great lens, and I look forward to seeing more lenses like it from Nikon in the future, such as the 14-24 that we're going to be seeing in the next couple of months. If you have any other questions about this lens, please pop them in the comment section. I'll be happy to try and answer your queries. Equally, if you liked the video, give it a thumbs up. The other button works as well. And if you haven't already, please do subscribe, whether it's to make sure you catch the 2.0 teleconverter video or indeed all the other upcoming ones, because you've got a lot of Nikon kit that we're also still reviewing. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you again next time. Goodbye.